Now joining us, Marc Elrich. He is running for Montgomery County Executive candidate, and there's a fascinating story of a guy who's trying to spend millions of dollars against him in this race. God knows for what reason, but that's what we're going to try to find out. So, Marc, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
All right. So, Marc, you've got an amazing history. You marched with Dr. King on Washington. And you've been in office and a teacher for a long, long time, have a lot of accomplishments I want to talk about in a second. But first, for a lot of the people that are not familiar, what in the world is the Montgomery County Executive candidate? What is that?
Well, I'm a Democrat, makes me the candidate. Montgomery County Executive. So the Montgomery County Executive is the executive person in the county government. We have a 9-member council, and we have a county executive. The county executive has veto authority over the legislation, provides the first cuts, for example, at a budget, and then submits the budget over to the council. You're responsible for overseeing the operations of all the departments in the county. So it's sort of quasi, I guess, the executive branch of the county government. And the council is the legislative branch.
So you are the executive of the council that runs Montgomery County if you win?
Well, you're not really the executive of the council. You sit in a different building and you're just the executive of the county. The council has a rotating president, so it's a different situation. So there's the council on one side of the street and the executive building on the other side of the street.
Okay, thank you for that education. I appreciate it. I don't know if anybody else does, but I enjoyed it. Okay. So because I'm trying to figure out why in the world your opponent might spend, and this seems unbelievable, $5 million on this race?
That's the rumor. He's over 2 right now.
No, he already spent $2 million?
Yep, he did. Because he's somebody who had no record or history in Montgomery County. Nobody knows who he is or what he did until he decided to run. So he had to create name recognition. So he's bought an amazing amount of television, any square inch on Facebook he occupies to create an impression of himself. And he's calling himself a progressive Democrat. Of course, he's a former Republican. He's being backed by land use attorneys and developers and a bunch of Republicans, but he says he's a progressive Democrat. Go figure.
Marc, are you sure you're not running for county executive of Fort Knox?
I guess there are a lot of people who stand to benefit from an executive who, the group that's backing him wants us to cut basically the major taxes that sit on development in the county, which are the very resources we use to build schools and try to provide transportation. So in a sense, an executive who is uber sympathetic to what the business community, it's really the development community, the business community, most of them aren't developers. So it's really about the development community. Somebody who's sympathetic to them is worth millions of dollars to them, if not more.
Wow. This is what systemic corruption in our government looks like. Because, a lot of people, that's why I wanted to dive so much into this issue. You might think why? Why in the world? Any rational person would think, why in the world? But there's millions of dollars that are at stake in so many of these elections. And so, I talked to Gail McLaughlin from Richmond, California recently, and when they took control of their city council, they raised taxes on Chevron by $100 million over 8 years. So that's a lot. And Chevron spent $3.5 million trying to defeat them. Makes sense when you do the math, right?
It does.
Yeah.
It's a small investment for a big return.
Yeah.
And he's even better because he's financing himself.
Yeah, the private financing of these elections is insanity. It's absolute insanity. So let's talk about your track record, Marc. So I see that you led 2 successful efforts to raise the minimum wage. Talk to us about that. How'd you do that, and what was that process like?
I started 4 years ago to bring the wage up to $11.50, and it was arduous. I worked with the District of Columbia and Prince George's County so that we all introduced legislation at the same time. It was an idea I got from the chamber that was upset with me for doing minimum wage without, we were isolating Montgomery County from everybody else. And I thought to myself, well, I can fix that problem. So I went to political leaders in the district in Prince George's County and said, let's do it together. And so we did it together. We got up to $11.50. My council was probably the hardest fight. There was an effort to stall it at $10.50. There are people who weren't really happy with it. And the Washington Post, of course, was against it. But I succeeded, and this July it goes to $11.50. And about a little over a year ago, I introduced a bill to raise it to $15 by my proposal was 2020. And we passed the bill 5-4. The executive vetoed it. They did a study trying to prove that the minimum wage would destroy the universe. And their study was so bad that they not only didn't pay the consultant, they didn't even use the arguments that were made in the study. I picked up a 6th vote. We compromised on 2021 and smaller businesses in 23 and 24, but we're going to get to $15 for most people in 2021. In the end of the day, it was a 9-0 vote, but it should have come sooner, and we shouldn't have had some of the delays.
So they say progressives can't be pragmatic. Well, that sounds like that was pretty pragmatic and a lot of good politics, as opposed to bad politics, to get to the results that actually serves your community. I can see why you're a danger. So
that's part of the problem, I think. Actually,
what's that?
I think people worry that I'll compromise and I'll work things out. I mean, at one point, the Post, criticized me saying I wouldn't compromise on the minimum wage, and I said, yes, I will. And then I did, and then they're still not happy with me. It's sort of like nothing I do. They'd prefer that I be a caricature rather than be a person who has to operate in the real world. I won't give them that. Yeah,
no, it is disheartening how much the establishment media has disdain for progressives.
It is.
Yeah, and it's deeply, deeply troubling. Okay, we're also in favor of banning the box. For people unfamiliar with that, can you tell them what that means?
So if you were applying for a job and had a criminal record, oftentimes you'd be confronted by a job application that would just have a box on it that says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And oftentimes that's the last time you would hear from the company employing you. So we passed legislation in the county that said you can't have that on your application. And you can't ask the question in an interview until you've gone through the bulk of the interview. Because we wanted to be sure that people who had spent their time and paid their debt to society, that when they got out, they had a chance of getting jobs rather than somebody just saying, oh, you're a criminal, I'm not going to hire you. And we actually had employers say that they had found that when they interviewed people who had a background, oftentimes the people turned out to be really good employees. That, having done time and having to want to reenter society and not go back to that again, people change their perspective and they change their behaviors. And if you never get a chance to do that, then I'm just essentially just saying go back out in the street and support yourself the way you've been used to supporting yourself. And that's bad for them and it's bad for society. So we wanted to open up possibilities for people.
Dangerous indeed. Okay, so
a clear threat to society.
Helping people. I don't know what you were thinking. No wonder the Washington Post is against you. All right, so I want to talk about your personal life for one quick second, because I see that you got 2 biological kids, and then you fostered and adopted 2 boys with Down syndrome who are now all grown. But that's amazing, and bless your heart. But what I found to be more amazing was that you built a house for your daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren around the corner. Did you you didn't build it from the ground up, did you?
Well, the house my daughter and my son-in-law and my grandchildren live in, I actually had my son-in-law was a builder. He framed it, and me and friends did all the drywall, insulation, ductwork, everything you could possibly imagine. And then when my ex moved out into an apartment that a friend of ours lives in, my daughter and her children and her husband moved in there. And I'm right around the corner from them in another house I just finished renovating for myself.
What hasn't Marc Elrich done? Okay, but on the other hand, the other guy has millions of dollars. So
true.
Right. So Marc, before we go, what's your assessment of the current state of the race? Because you do have a a really rich track record, if you will, in that area. And so a lot of people know you and they know your accomplishments, and other guys spending a lot of money on air. So I don't know. I don't know which way that goes in this current state of affairs.
It's really tough. I mean, I'm dealing with a newspaper who is more than happy to distort my record and who I am to create an image of me that's not what I'm about. And on the other hand, you've got a candidate who did polling to figure out what Montgomery County residents want to see, and then cast himself as the candidate who will be that, which it just floors me. But that's what you can do with millions of dollars. If you have no record, you can paint any image of yourself that you want, and nobody knows any better. And that's one of the real dangers of money in politics. I mean, I can't even correct the nonsense that the Post has written. And he doesn't have to correct anything. He just is whoever he is. And if you look at I looked at the questionnaire. I filled out the questionnaire that the group that he's associated with, this group called Empower Montgomery, asked all the candidates. And these guys are so 180 degrees from the stuff that the candidate who was part of this group says he's for. And it's just the ability to be whatever you want to be, and no one connects you. The group, this Empower Montgomery group, doesn't even talk about Blair as being part of the group when they formed it. He's just a candidate out there by a rare coincidence, and they just happen to have an agenda that I would think he helped develop in the first place. So I don't think people know that, and that's really hard to get out.
Marc, unfortunately, a lot of the problems you're facing, progressive candidates across the country face. There's a fake progressive running in Michigan. He just rebuilt his own image, not attached to reality. He did the polling. He was trying to decide whether he'd run as a Republican or a Democrat. Found out in the polling that running as a Bernie Sanders Democrat does polls the best. So then he pretends he is one, and he's got so much millions of dollars he pours in, and then people don't know. They didn't see your campaign. They didn't see his opponent's campaign. They only saw his image because it's in the ads, right? Manufacturer or otherwise. In California, the papers are so pro-establishment. It's sickening, and so we're all in this together, brother. And we
certainly are.
Yeah, and we got to stick together. That's our only hope. So I want to give everybody the links for Marc. It's marcelrich.org. If you're watching live, easy, marcelrich.org. And if you're watching later on YouTube or Facebook, please go to the description box where you'll find the links. Just click on them and you'll find out more about Marc's campaign and see if you want to donate and volunteer for him as well. Marc, thank you for joining us on the TYT Network.
Oh, look, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.